It is a pleasure to be back here in Dubai and addressing all of you. It's exciting to see the second annual event of the GPRC Summit and to be part of that. And I'm very excited that there's the GRC professional training tomorrow being delivered by Governance Dynamics. I actually was one of the original course authors and wrote the test for that 16 years ago with OSEG. And I'm very happy to see that that training is being delivered tomorrow and hope to see many of you there as well. Now, let's talk about the journey to GRC, Agile and Cognitive Governance, Risk, and Compliance, or in the context of today's conference, GPRC, and putting that performance aspect in it as well. So in that case, the modern organization is what we refer to as navigating chaos. It's changing minute by minute, second by second. Regulations are changing. New laws, new regulations, enforcement actions. Just take one industry, financial services. Global financial services firms are dealing with 257 regulatory change events every business day coming from 1,217 regulators around the world. That's a lot of legal and regulatory change, and that's just one industry. We have a changing external risk environment. Risks are changing externally that impact our business. Geopolitical risks, economic risk and uncertainty, supply chain disruptions, natural disasters, those impact our business and our ability to reliably achieve the objectives of the organization and perform. But not only do we have these external things bearing down on us, like regulations and risks, we also have changes to our internal business. Processes are changing, strategies changing, objectives are changing, employees are changing, technology is evolving and changing. And we have to keep all that change in sync. But also, the modern organization is not about traditional brick and mortar walls and traditional employees. The modern organization is the extended enterprise. Vendors, suppliers, outsourcers, service providers, contractors, consultants, brokers, agents, dealers, intermediaries, partners, and more. They are your business. We can't define the organization by these hard boundaries of traditional brick and mortar walls and business anymore. The business extends across third-party relationships. Their issues are your issues. And we have to keep all this in sync. As regulations change, as risks change, the businesses change, we need to keep all of that in sync. And that's the challenge of governance, risk, and compliance today. The physicist Fritjof Capra stated it very well. The more we study the major problems of our time, the more we come to realize they cannot be understood in isolation. They are systemic problems, which means that they are interconnected and interdependent. The physicist at the time of this quote was talking about biological ecosystems, but he might as well have been talking about risk in your environment today. That we can't be having these siloed views of risk that don't see the big picture. Now, I'm working with a global firm on their governance, risk, and compliance RFP this year. This is a large global firm that has over 300,000 employees. They just interviewed 20 different risk departments that have gone in different directions for risk. They have no centralized risk visibility and system right now. And they've got 20 departments that have gone in different directions. And so far, they've counted 9 different GRC platforms installed for different purposes. They don't have good visibility into risk. It's all these little silos that don't get the big picture of this interconnected nature of risk. Because that risk, if it materializes, impacts this risk exposure and this risk exposure. And it's all significant. And we have to be able to see that. So let's turn to the definition of governance, risk, and compliance found in the OSEG GRC capability model. Those who will be going to the OSEG GRCP training tomorrow, here's a start to that, because you'll be learning this. Governance, risk, and compliance is a capability that enables an organization to what? To reliably achieve objectives. That's the governance function. Setting objectives and being able to reliably achieve, or we could say perform against those objectives. They could be high-level entity-level objectives, division, department, process, project, asset-level objectives, or even relationship-level objectives. Now, like third-party relationships, we don't just wake up one day and say, I feel like we need a new supplier. No, there's a purpose for a supplier relationship. What are the objectives? What are we trying to get out of that relationship? What are the objectives of that asset? What's the objectives of that process? What are the objectives of that department and its goals? What's the objectives of the overall entity and financial performance? The governance function is setting and performing against objectives. So GRC or GPRC, focusing on the G and the GP. And then we address uncertainty. That's risk management. The ISO 31000 definition of risk in the International Standard on Risk Management says that risk is the effect of uncertainty on what? On objectives. There's context. The objectives flows into the uncertainty in achieving those objectives, which is risk management. And then we act with integrity. That's the compliance. Not just compliance to laws and regulations, but in compliance to the values of your organization, the ethics, the ESG commitments. So GRC, done right, is a capability that enables an organization to reliably achieve objectives, address uncertainty, and act with integrity. Those themes are like three legs of a stool that work together. You take one of those out and it's unstable. That's why the governance, risk, and compliance definition is so strong. It provides stability. And we could say four legs to a stool if we break that out, the G out into the G and the P for GPRC. Now let's get some views of risk. I started my career in the 90s in the cybersecurity, IT security world, and thought, risk is something bad. Risk is something that we want to avoid. We must eliminate risk. We don't eliminate risk. Every business takes risk. If you don't have risk, you're out of business. And in our keynote this morning, the opening keynote, stated that very well, that risk is part of life. Teddy Roosevelt, a United States president, said, "Risk is like fire. If controlled, it will help you. If uncontrolled, it will rise up and destroy you." Risk is a tool for us. For governments, it's a tool for organizations and business. It's a tool in our personal lives. How we take and manage risk is critical. Risk is like fire. If controlled, it will help you. If uncontrolled, it will rise up and destroy you. John Paul Jones, he's a naval hero from 250 years ago. He was in a big battle against the British, and he's known for that famous saying, "I have not yet begun to fight," and turn around and win a big naval battle. But he also stated, "It seems to be a law of nature, inflexible and inexorable, that those who do not risk do not win." Again, if you're not taking risk, you're out of business. Every business takes risk. Are you taking the right risk? Are you managing that risk well in the context of your organization? Going down to South Africa, Judge Mervyn Keene. He's the impetus for the Keene 1, 2, 3, and 4 reports on corporate governance. Judge Mervyn Keene said, "Business is the undertaking of risk for reward." Basically, businesses take risk to make money. Risk is part of business. Are we managing risk well? Or what are we doing to address risk management in the context of the organization's objectives? Too often, GRC programs are backwards. They're CRG programs, or they're CR programs, or they're just C programs focusing on the compliance, and not done properly in perspective, where it starts with the objectives, flows into risk, and then compliance. Now, I'm a science fiction fan, and so we'll have one more little analogy and quote here, and that comes from Captain James T. Kirk of the Starship Enterprise. In one of the original series, he's going on and encouraging his crew to go on this mission, and he said, Risk is our business. That's what this starship is all about. That's why we're aboard her." Captain James T. Kirk. Risk is our business. Every one of your businesses, risk is your business. Now, you might be aggressive in taking risk, or you might be, rather conservative in taking risk. But how you take and manage risk is critical to the success and survival of your business. Risk is your business. Now, I was teaching my Risk and Resilience Management by Design workshop in Amsterdam in September, and so just a few months ago. And I had this chief risk officer from a life sciences organization that was attending. And he told this excellent story. I wrote a whole blog on this. I've actually written 2 blogs on it now because it's a great story. He got hired as the chief risk officer. And in that interview process, the CEO comes up to him and says, "So you want to be the new chief risk officer? Tell me, what are you going to do for me as the CEO? What does that mean to me that you're the chief risk officer?" And this chief risk officer candidate looks him in the eye and says, "My job is to ensure that you have no surprises in achieving your objectives." And the CEO said, "That's the best answer anybody's ever given me for what risk management is." No surprises. Now, that's a lofty goal. There's always going to be surprises. This complexity and having chaos of the business world, there's going to be surprises. But at the end of the day, that's really what risk management's about. It's managing uncertainty, making sure that the business, and it's charting its path forward, knows what's going to happen and what could happen, and what are the scenarios that can play out. That's good risk management, ensuring that there's no surprises. Then there's the rhythm of risk, the rhythm of governance, risk, and compliance throughout the business, managing GRC in the cycles and patterns of the business to reliably achieve its objectives. I mentioned I'm an OSEG fellow and helped with the GRC professional training, originally developed that course and things. One of the other OSEG fellows is Brad Jewett. He was the enterprise risk director at Microsoft. He's now the CFO of Corel Corporation, a large software firm. And so when he's at Microsoft, he had this whole approach called the rhythm of risk, the rhythm of GRC. And what he would do is he knew that he had the tactical elements. Every year had to do this risk assessment and this risk assessment, this health and safety assessment, this privacy risk assessment, this security risk assessment. Those are the tactical routine things he had to do. But he made sure that he had staff that would sit down with senior executives and management at different levels of Microsoft and saying, what are you being measured against? What are the objectives of your department and function that you're being measured against? And let's give you contextually relevant risk reports based on the objectives that have been set upon you to achieve. So you have risk information on the uncertainty around achieving those objectives. That's doing risk management. He would look at the board and executive calendars and agenda and look at those, what's going to be presented, and he would provide risk information aligned with the board and executive agenda and calendars for their meetings. That's the rhythm of risk, managing risk in the context of the business. Good risk management also requires risk orchestration. I have blogs just about on every one of these slides. This is another blog I just recently did in the last couple months. But think about what the role of the chief risk officer is. I was in a conversation just over the weekend, somebody said that risk done right, we eliminate the chief risk officer. There is no risk department. It's all in the business. I do agree that risk needs to be embedded in the business, but there's always going to be a role for that risk department and the chief risk officer because somebody's got to see risk across those 20 different departments and be able to see what's the big picture and how this scenario plays out, because that economic uncertainty can impact the performance and objectives in this area and supply chain issues over here. Somebody's got to see the big picture of risk. And that's that role of the chief risk officer. He's the conductor of risk. You look at an orchestra and you got the violins, the violas, the cellos, the bass, the woodwinds, the percussion instruments, and it's the conductor that sees across all this and makes sure everybody's playing their parts in the proper way, and nothing's getting out of balance, nothing's stepping out of risk tolerance and appetite. That's the role of a chief risk officer, is to have that risk visibility and to see that interconnectedness of risk that the physicist Fritjof Capra that I quoted stated earlier. It's about good risk orchestration. Now, good risk management is going to bring in resilience. Resilience is that ability to recover from a risk event. The elasticity, the ability for a process or service to spring back from a risk issue. If I'm running down the street and I trip, resilience is how quickly can I get back up and start running again and recover. We need to be resilient. The last several years has shown us the need for resilience. Between COVID-19, the war in Ukraine, the recent disruption in the Middle East here, so much is going on. We need to be resilient. The economic uncertainty, inflation, all this impacts our business. But resilience is critical and important, but it's not enough. We also need to be agile. We need to see what's coming at us. If I'm running down the street, what's that obstacle I would have tripped on? How can I leap over it or go around it? We need good risk agility. What's developing on the horizon? What are the scenarios that can play out? What's the best path forward for the organization? So organizations need a top-down approach of GRC management strategy that brings together the senior level objectives of the organization. In some areas of the world, I know a GRC strategy and technology RFP in Germany that's being led by the board of directors, the top level. But what's our GRC management strategy? What are the different roles and departments and functions involved? How do we get them to work together? What are our common GRC management processes for risk identification, risk monitoring, risk treatment, managing performance and objectives, managing policies, procedures, audits, assurance, assessments, third-party risk evaluations, incidents, cases, investigations? What are a range of GRC management processes, and how do we make them consistent in the organization? And what's the role of information technology to deliver on that? So in the introduction, it was mentioned that I've been called the father of GRC because on a cold, snowy day in the Chicago office of Forrester Research, I defined and modeled a market in February 2002 and labeled it governance, risk, and compliance, a market for technology. Now, let me first state that GRC is something organizations do. It's not something they buy. Technology enables governance, risk, and compliance. You can't buy governance, risk, and compliance. You buy technology that enables governance, risk, and compliance. It makes it more efficient, effective, resilient, and agile. At the end of the day, governance, risk, and compliance are actions, activities of the organization. Technology just streamlines it and makes it more efficient and effective. Now, I get frustrated when organizations like this large insurance company that called me up one day and said, "We just bought GRC, now come and tell us how to do GRC." Well, that's backwards. That's putting the cart before the horse. What were you doing before? What wasn't working? What are you trying to improve? Now, every organization does GRC. Every one of you, your organizations does GRC. Whether you call it GRC, ERM, ORM, IRM, ABC, XYZ, every organization has some approach to governance, risk, and compliance, no matter what acronym you put on it. The question is, how can it be better? Now, on that cold, snowy day in the Chicago office of Forrester, I defined and modeled a market for GRC that I had a broad vision for. But this is 2002, and also what happened that year was Sarbanes-Oxley, Enron, WorldCom. And so the first several years of GRC technology history is what I call the Sarbanes-Oxley captivity of GRC, where it's focused on internal controls over financial reporting. Then we entered GRC 2.0, Enterprise GRC. And this fulfilled more of my original vision for GRC, but it's enabling those second and third line, the back office functions of governance, risk, and compliance to work together. From there, we entered GRC architecture. There's not one platform that does absolutely everything. There could be a core platform, and there could be best-of-breed solutions where they make sense. And it needs to integrate into the ERP and business environment, integrate into external content providers like regulatory databases and threat vulnerability databases and watch lists, sanction lists, negative news, all these different elements. What's your architecture? Then about 2017, there were a lot of complaints. GRC had been around for 15 years about the point of 2017. Technology, that is, GRC technology. And there's a LinkedIn post that described one implementation of one of the major vendors out there to the lyrics of the song Hotel California. If you're not familiar with the lyrics, it's basically you're stuck and cannot get out. And so they said after $500,000 in software license, $2 million in implementation fees, 2 years later we're getting some basic functionality working. People were stuck on upgrades from hard coding and customization and things. So we entered the era of Agile GRC. Low-code, no-code solutions that are easy to implement and configure, that had a lower cost of implementation and maintenance. And so that's this Agile GRC. Now, built on Agile GRC, we're now in the era of cognitive GRC. How do we extend Agile GRC technologies with artificial intelligence to be able to enable them and bring more value to the organization? And what's the role of AI in governance, risk, and compliance? And we'll get to that in a second. And we're moving towards this future, and I'll be writing a lot on it this year, of business-integrated GRC, building GRC more into a business context in alignment with the business. So when I look at the market, there's things that organizations should be looking at across the organization, not just in departments and silos, like 20 different departments doing different things, but across the organization. These are the long horizontal bars. We need to have technology and processes that look at strategy, performance, and objective management across the organization and measures against that. We need an enterprise view of risk and resilience management, an enterprise view of compliance, ethics, and obligation regulatory management, an enterprise view of policies and training management, an enterprise view of internal controls, not just internal controls or financial reporting IT controls. If you have an enterprise view of risk, it basically requires that you have an enterprise view of controls. When you have a risk, there's 4 things you can do. You can accept the risk, you can avoid the risk if that's a possibility, you can transfer the risk like through hedging and insurance, or the one we focus on the most is risk mitigation. How do you do risk mitigation? We have our inherent risk here, we implement control A, B, and C. That's our residual risk. We finally find that risk acceptable if we implement those controls. if we're going to have an enterprise view of risk, we have to have an enterprise view of controls. Issue reporting and case management, having an enterprise view of all the incidents, cases, and complaints, investigations of the organization. An enterprise view of ESG, environmental social governance. Enterprise view of third-party governance. Not this fragmented view where IT is doing its vendor risk thing and procurement's doing its financial viability thing and compliance is doing its regulatory thing on third parties. We need an integrated view of third-party risk as well. And I don't have time to get all the details of that, but that's a huge issue when you have these fragmented views because nobody sees the big aggregate picture of risk, like in a supply chain relationship, because everybody's got a little piece of understanding of risk, and that risk exposure might be really great if you look at the aggregate view of risk across like a relationship. And an enterprise view of audit. And there's a lot of department, domain-specific areas of GRC below that. But we need to have a strong information architecture that can define our objectives, whether they're entity, department, division, process, project, asset, relationship level objectives. We can define those objectives. We can map risks to those objectives. We can then establish controls to address those risks and reliably achieve objectives. We can manage issues and incidents, cases, and investigations that might hinder us in achieving those objectives and show our risk is materialized and our controls failed, where policies and roles, obligations are all mapped together. It all starts with objectives. But so often, people start with risks. Risk needs context. You have to start with objectives. And that's why GPRC is so important, focusing on that G and the P. I get very frustrated in this ESG era that we're in, environmental social governance, when I see software, that all starts with a risk. No, it starts with objectives. We have an objective to be carbon neutral. We have an objective to have no child labor in our supply chain. ESG all starts with objectives, and we manage the risk to those objectives. So good agile GRC technology is going to be highly usable, intuitive, not just for back office subject matter experts on risk and compliance, but usable for the front office, the employees, all levels of the business. It's going to have a lower total cost of ownership to implement and maintain. It's going to be configurable without hard coding that locks people in and they can't upgrade the system and things because it's all hard coded. It's going to be scalable, adaptable, easy to integrate in the environment, provides robust analytics, and is leveraging artificial intelligence. Now let's get into this role of artificial intelligence. In the governance, risk, and compliance perspective, I see two elements to AI. There's what I call cognitive GRC. This is GRC 5.0, cognitive GRC, and that's the use of artificial intelligence to make governance, risk, and compliance processes more efficient, effective, resilient, and agile. So how do we leverage AI for governance, risk, and compliance? But then we have, and I have a whole paper written on this, AI GRC. It's the governance, risk, and compliance of artificial intelligence itself. AI can be a tool for the business if used properly and governed properly. But allowing the organization to go in a lot of different directions with AI can cause a lot of legal exposure and bad decisions and issues if used improperly. AI itself, across the business, needs to be governed. And in that context, risk and compliance needs to be managed with it as well. And so that's AI GRC, the governance of the use of artificial intelligence across the organization to ensure the reliable achievement of objectives, address uncertainty and act with risk. Address uncertainty and act with integrity and compliance in the use of AI. But AI allows us to take in a lot of distributed data points in the business, understand these contextually, map them together, and help us navigate the business forward in the organization. Now, there's a lot of challenges with artificial intelligence and opportunities. AI is powerful. That is an opportunity because it can do a lot for the business, but power not used properly can also cause a lot of damage. AI is complex in the depths of it, but on the flip side of it, it's also simple now. Yes, it's complex and simple. It sounds like I'm contradicting myself. AI itself is very complex. I can't go out there and write AI and things. I'm not a coder like that. There's a lot of complexity and depth to it. It's taken a lot of time to get to where we're at with technology. But now, with things like ChatGPT and things, it's easy for anybody to use and go out there and use it. And so that's where it's simple. There's complexity behind it, but we've made the availability and use of AI simple for the business, which actually can bring benefits to the business, but also risk to the business if that AI is improperly used as well. It can enhance productivity if it's used properly. But there's also privacy concerns and like bias and discrimination concerns if the AI data inputs are improper in the organization and not being used properly. There's opaqueness and mystery behind the AI models and how are they controlled properly and what's gone into them. And also potential growing legal liability. When AI fails, it can cause devastating challenges to the organization. Used properly, it can create benefits. My whole point is that AI in the hands of a skilled subject matter expert can extend that subject matter expertise. I don't think anybody in this room has staff in governance, risk, and compliance, whether it's audit, risk management, compliance, or whatever, security, whatever roles you're in, that says, we don't need any more staff. We got people sitting around with nothing to do. No, we're not getting enough done. Everybody's taxed and at capacity. And so AI can extend and help us get more done. And it empowers subject matter expertise. But on the flip side, artificial intelligence in the hands of a novice can be very dangerous. Artificial intelligence in the hands of a subject matter expert that's lazy and is going to let the machine make all the decisions for them without any intuitiveness and decisions on the part of the subject matter expert can be dangerous. But in the hands of a skilled subject matter expert that understands their job, the context, and can leverage AI and know that it can get 80% of the work done but needs some subject matter expertise to adapt and make sure it applies to the right business context, that's where AI can be very powerful. So AI helps us learn from experience, use what is learned to draw conclusions, identify relationships and patterns, solve complex and difficult problems, particularly when across data that we can't process and see as humans, because we don't have the time to do it, understands different languages and contexts, and can create information and perspectives. Machine learning, or deep learning, is a subset of AI that allows systems to learn from data without explicit programming. It can be used to analyze historical data to predict future risk, aiding in proactive risk management. It can scrutinize past financial transactions to forecast and prevent fraud in the future, deliver expert risk management insights, and enhance data sourcing. Natural language processing enables machines to read, understand, and interpret human language. If you print off the United Kingdom's FCA rulebook, I've never tested this, but I'm told it's a stack of paper 6 feet tall. If you print off the United States Code of Federal Regulations and stack it end to end, it's longer than a marathon. 50 kilometers? I mean, that's a lot of paper. Now, how long would it take you to read that amount of paper? A machine can read it in minutes, not just read it, but dissect it and map it. And I was talking to one chief compliance officer at a life sciences firm in the United Kingdom, and they said in their internal testing of natural language processing, not only was artificial intelligence, a gazillion times faster at reading regulations and mapping them, but it was 30% more accurate. I mean, if you had a stack of paper to read of regulations and laws, your mind's going to wander and think, what am I doing for dinner tonight? What are the plans this holiday season? And we're going to miss things. Natural language processing, machines, stays on task. Predictive analytics and expert systems are computer systems that mimic the decision-making abilities of a human expert. These systems aid in making informed decisions by providing insights based on accumulated knowledge and data. Such as search policies and documents by understanding the searcher's intent. It can identify business units and processes with missing and inadequate controls. Neural networks are algorithms modeled after the human brain designed to recognize patterns. Neural networks are instrumental in detecting anomalies and patterns in vast data sets. So this can be discovering, and identifying and surfacing data relationships, improve data discovery via data enrichment, classify content according to our risk taxonomy. And then robotic process automation is the use of software robots to automate highly repetitive tasks so that if we see some type of potential fraud, we can cut off access to that and maybe block that transaction. Generative AI creates new data like the data it was trained on that can help us generate policies and control statements and narratives. But again, it needs subject matter expert review and make sure it's appropriate for the business. Responsible use of AI, and we need to ensure that AI systems comply with evolving laws and regulations. We need to manage the uncertainty and risk of the use of AI, meet ethical standards, deliver trust and transparency, provide strategic business alignment, and enable agility as the AI landscape is rapidly changing, as we've seen this last year. But strong cognitive GRC enables proactive risk management, enhanced ongoing continuous compliance monitoring for the here and now, but also the horizon scanning, what's coming at us, efficient use of resources, and informed decision making. We're moving towards that future of business integrated GRC, where we take Agile and Cognitive GRC and we build it more into the business, the GPRC, where strategy, objective, and performance management is central, by taking a top-down approach to objectives and aligning risk and compliance. Where we have business process modeling and enterprise architecture to understand the business process, and controls are part of the business process, not these additional layers of complexity. We leverage technology that includes business management platforms that integrates controls and policies and risks within the context of managing the business. We can take up both the top-down and bottom-up view of risk and automate business controls throughout the business. But business integrated GRC that's built on cognitive and agile GRC makes us more aware of those risks across the organization in the context of the business and its objectives and performance against those objectives. That allows all those different departments, like that one firm with 20 different risk departments, to be able to work together collectively and to be responsive to changes in the business environment, agile to see what's coming at the organization and go through scenarios and plan to navigate the business forward, but know that there will be issues. Risk events will happen, so we're resilient to contain those risk events, keep them when they're small, and to be able to recover from them, and do this with technology that makes it more efficient in our time and our money.